The fourth step in the implementation of the positive for restaurant equipment is setting up the um, system setup. So selecting the maintenance tab, go to system setup, and you'll be asked for a series of questions on how you want your system to be uniquely set up. So the first group is the general selection, and the question, do you want to show the tip of the day at startup? That's a little box that'll come up and give you little hints on the special features and little shortcuts that are available, and you'll get one of these every time you log in if you check this. You definitely want to use enter equals the tab key to be able to move around your screens. You can start your calendar date on a Monday if you wish, and if you click that, and then you can pick the hours of operation that your uh, store will be working with. This is important to load the printer form settings on startup. This way it'll load all the fonts ahead of time, so it'll make printing much faster. And we're telling it to allow the retention of credit card tokens, because this does make it PCI compliant, and we can store the customer's credit cards on our machine, and they're tokenized. We don't see the actual numbers. The tokens are unreadable to us. We don't use the map point because Microsoft has discontinued that software. We are going to go ahead and track commissions, and we're going to base our commissions off of the profit using the actual cost. And for zero cost, we're allowed to use that, and or you can set your commissions based off a percentage of selling price. These are the user definable background fields, and down here below we can have sounds that'll play. If you don't find a certain part number, a sound could come up. I usually turn all these off. Under transactions, I suggest assigning the invoice number at the end of the transaction. That way you can void the invoice if you make a mistake prior to actually tendering it, and it won't use up an invoice number. I turn off or leave the skipped prompt for PO number. This is where it's going to ask you what your customer purchases order number is on the sales. If you click that, it won't ask you. If you leave it unclicked, it'll ask you for a customer's PO number. Require an F10 to accept when asking for quantity. I leave that off. I do allow packages. Packages are when you sell 3 or 4 items as one package at one price. I do suggest using allow back orders on invoices, and if you wish you can take that from the pending orders prior then back ordering, and then those pending orders will be back ordered. I usually leave that off. And I also say we want to basically charge the customer when they receive the item. So if you have an invoice with back-ordered items, we're not going to put on the invoice the back-ordered dollars. We'll show that they're back-ordered, but we won't charge the customer until we actually ship it to them. We do want to show the item picture on the screen, and that's the inventory screen and sales screens. I leave these two off. The automatically apply the decimal point and pop up and display the item prices. If you check that and you make a change in the price, a window will come up with all 6 prices that you can select from. Most people don't want the salespeople to see that. the job costs, due days, etc. I usually leave those as default. This is where you start your current invoice where you pick up off your old system. Same thing with order, what numbers. At the start of the transaction, we can prompt for an email address, ask for a phone number, ask for a zip code, or ask for a text number if we're going to do text messaging, letting the customer know that their order is in or their service work is completed. Come get it. Here is the percentage of the window when you set the customer's pricing up and your salesman tries to change that pricing. You get to put in a percentage. Maybe you want to put 3% in, and that will allow the salesman who doesn't have the privilege of changing the price to change the price within the 3% window of the default price, sell price for the customer. And if we're selling it below cost, we want it to be alerted. And if you are not given the privilege to sell below cost, you must have a manager in the office override a sell below cost. Our quantity separators is default to a slash. I recommend setting it up as a pipe because many times there are slashes in the SKU or part numbers, and we don't want to have a conflict there. Under the customer tabs, I'm suggesting that we skip for an authorized buyer. If you leave that off, it's going to prompt you for a buyer every time you make a sale. Alert if customer has pending transactions when starting an invoice. This is a very good feature, letting you know that there are orders pending. So if the store manager places an order and then later on the owner comes in and realizes that he needs to get the same items and he calls you to place the order, you'll be able to tell him that the order is currently pending and he won't double order. Default to customer assigned sales ID when invoicing. So no matter who's ringing up the sale, it will default to the salesman that's assigned to that customer. Include country in the bill to address. This is very rarely used because most people sell to people in the US. When creating a new transaction, set the ship to address to. You can set it to the default ship address. You can set it automatically to store pickup, or you can prompt where do you want the destination tax to be charged to. The tax lookup URL is a sales tax service that you can purchase, and that will pop up windows letting you know what the sales tax is for that city and that state if you're shipping out of state. Tender, we pretty much leave this alone. We don't prompt for change. If they are redeeming a gift certificate, you can check this and it won't ask if you want to give them change. If you leave this off, it'll leave the remaining part on the gift certificate. Do you require a driver's license for checks over what amount of dollars? Customer name is required for returns. This is good for walk-in customers, and you can get all their information when they try to do a return. Customer name required for tendering with credit cards. Well, the credit card will have the customer's name on it, so when you swipe it, that information will be there. Do not prompt to use unused AR credits when tendering. If you click this and the customer does have credits on the account, you won't know about it if you check this. I like to have knowledge out at the counter or when the salesman's taking an order, let the customer say, hey, you've got a return and you've got $1,000 in credit. You want to apply it against this particular order. And round to the nearest 5 cents. This is a state-by-state law whether or not you can round to the nearest 5 cents. Service orders. If you are doing service work, you want to support the sub-owner when creating a service order. So if someone purchases an item from a supplier locally that you originally sold to the supplier, do you want to be able to support that item even though the person didn't originally buy it from you, they bought it from the supplier? Do not print the service notes on the invoice. And many times the service notes are very confidential, and you may not want those to show on your invoice. Default the status when they're coming in. You can pop this little window and set what is the status when someone brings something in for service. And this typically we use checked in. And add a new quote as either a standard quote, a service quote, or ask, is this a standard quote or is this a service quote? For shipping, you can activate WorldShip and it will calculate what your freight amount is and put it on your invoice for you. For printing, we have check validation printer support, where if you put a check in one of those special printers that reads the check and types information on the back and has it take the money directly out of the customer's account. You saved is something that will print on a sales slip, and it'll take the customer's price level, and if you're giving them a discount, it'll show them how much money they saved. Prompts are very powerful. You can set these up uniquely. I've set this up for job cost. So when it's going to be a job cost project, the first prompt is a note, which is unlimited in size, and you can put a full description of the job and then create additional prompts and unique things that you need to show on your job invoices and in your job reports above and beyond what the job cost system gives you. So you could tell it, where do you want to show those prompts? I've just got mine selected for job cost only. Display the transaction prompt. When do we want to make this thing prompt? When the transaction starts, or at the end when the transaction enter button is pressed? In job cost, we don't really do the tender until the end of the job or partial shipment. So we always want to start at the beginning. And then you can pick a dollar amount to say when you want these prompts. The entry options. If you set up the advanced searching, when you're looking for things like a SKU or a part number, where we could tell it to search the vendor SKUs as well as our own inventory SKUs. We can search customer code, lookup codes. We can search customer phone numbers. If they have any kind of incentive programs and you give them a card, they can do a search on the frequent buyer numbers. Here where we have on if you don't find the value you put in the field, like for inventory, we're telling it to jump right to the inventory lookup if it doesn't have the number that you typed in that field. For customers, we're going to do a default lookup on the customer's name. The default terms can be any of the terms that are user definable. So I'm going to select no terms, but if the customer does have terms in their setup, it will use those terms. I'm not going to track the area code for phones. On the auto-generate customer code from phone number, I'm not doing that. My tax group is based on the shipping address, which is called destination tax. Use a zip code lookup when entering a customer information. We can have it do that. It'll show all the customers within that zip code. Skip the city-state field and go right to the zip code when you're adding a customer, and that way it'll fill in the city and the state automatically for you. And we're using the US Canadian address defaults. For inventory, we are tracking inventory quantities. We are allowing for items to be sold prior to actually receiving them into our inventory, and that's called negative inventory or pre-solds. Allow the duplicate SKUs, but never on primary, only on alternate SKUs. Allow upper and lower case for inventory items. Hide the long description. I always leave that unchecked. Allow spaces in SKUs. That works really good, but if you're using the e-commerce, you probably don't want to have spaces in your SKUs. I am not going to select the department list upon entry, and I'm not going to prompt for stock count when I'm entering new items. My default price level is going to be price level 2. Set the trade-ins to inactive when adding trade-ins. Enable food stamps. Very few of my customers have ever used food stamps in this industry. We do want to be able to have the pictures show up in inventory. And if you're using matrix items, such as aprons, hats, etc., and you want to have one SKU but multiple children's, like colors and sizes, you can set up a matrix for that. For pricing, how many decimal points we want to use for price, quantity. The basis for our markups is going to be cost. And if there does show no cost, we can use the current cost if it's 0 when you're doing a verification. Here's where you set up all your different price levels. If you have a situation where you want to hide your price in your SKU, you can set this up in this area right here. We're saying our quick sale is going to be price level 2, and our customer sale is going to be price level 3. For serial numbers, we're going to track serial numbers in service to know how many times we did work on the same item. We're going to enter the serial numbers when we're receiving our purchase orders. We're going to allow duplicate serial numbers because that's going to happen, and so that's okay. These duplicate serial numbers will be on different items, of course. Prompt for serial number when completing a transaction. And those transactions will be, if I do an invoice, I want to prompt for a serial number. Some people will prompt for serial number on orders, and that way that'll earmark that particular serial number for the warehouse to pick that oldest item when it brings it up front for us. Trade-ins, if you are taking trade-ins, and you can set a unique numbering system for a trade-in and then be prompted when you sell a new item that you do have a used item in stock. Invoicing, we're going to have a default lookup on our SKUs. So when using a barcode scanner, it looks at the SKU. Invoice prompt, when the negative stock is turned on, we could say prompt that it's here and go pre-sold. We can say it's always here and go pre-sold and not even prompt you, or prompt to back order the item. But if the guy's standing in front of you at the counter and he's holding the item, you certainly don't want to tell him it's not there because he's holding it. Fast add lets you go ahead and add items on the fly. Sometimes this is used on startup where you didn't get a chance to get all your inventory in ahead of time. Allocations, when you're converting a quote to a pending order, how do you want to handle the stock? Do you want to allocate items from your existing stock? Do you want to back order all items? Or do you want to prompt for which way you want to do it? And when adding items to pending, back order all the items, don't allocate it. Or when creating a PO from pending orders, always convert items, even if they're allocated, still put them on the purchase order. On the purchase order, we have grids for matrix items. On your PO numbers, we can have it autofill with a sequential number, next available number, the date, the next number for that date, and who the salesperson is. Or we could say no autofill, and we can go ahead and put our own value in the PO number field. When we receive the PO, we want to prompt immediately for a serial number. We also say, it says prompt immediately to confirm the price. I very rarely have that selected. What it's basically saying is, if the price came in higher of your cost, do you want to reallocate and recalculate your sell prices for that item? I want to be alerted when back orders have arrived for my order, sales order, so the warehouse knows it's go ahead and ship things. I want to include landed cost when receiving. That will capitalize the cost of my freight into my inventory value. And I usually set that when costs change my vendor and my item last costs. Under back orders, on my allocation, I want to allocate back orders on the date ordered, or I can allocate back orders on date due. Calculate landed cost based on cost. And then some of these other fields, omit the vendor SKU field in the PO, use the grid when doing your purchase for matrix. Do not allow duplicate items on a PO. That stops someone from accidentally putting the same item twice on the purchase order in error. Print standard type POs for the matrix items and include the notes when creating from sales order. So if you put notes in, they'll show up on the PO. In auto quotes imports of JSON files, we will be showing all the notes on the purchase order along with the cost that was from the project. When I generate my order list, I can have it default to the last vendor I ordered it from or from my primary vendor. Tax options. My quick sales tax for my store is in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. My package can be merchandise, which would be taxable, and then no tax category would be non-taxable. Can I round my sales tax up? Again, it depends on your state. And do I want to base my sales tax on the invoice total rather than each individual line? In receivables, I set this for 0, which will be the end of the month. It'll calculate finance charges. And when I do my aging, I want to age by the number of days due, not by the month. My statement printing, I want to include all transactions on the statement whenever it's printed. I am saying do not print any AR0 balances of an invoice on my statement. I'm using transaction-based statements. Now, when I mention about setting up your checking accounts, this is why we have to do this in front. When I am refunding a customer, it wants to know what checking account the money is going to come out of. And when I take payments from a customer, I want to choose which to put the payments against, which invoices, not auto-apply from the oldest. On accounts payable, when I'm cutting my checks, I want to generate my checks using this checking account. On my emails, I'm using Outlook, and I'm attaching PDFs when I send a transaction out or send a purchase order out. Consignments give me the ability to set up a percentage. If I take and resell one of my customers' pieces of equipment, how much am I going to take as my sales fee? Also, under the Station Manager, I get to further refine some of the system setups. Here on my station settings, I get to name what my station is, where I'm going to collect my tender. Under logging out, prompt to log out security or to switch users. That way it's going to prompt for a username and password if I switch users. Do I want to maximize my screens when I'm opening any of these? I usually leave this off. And my particular station is set up for the retail store. I can have multiple divisions, and a station that works in, let's say, the contract division, that could be their default. You always have the ability to click this little icon on the bottom and select the division for that particular sale. Transactions, I'm using always invoice style. And the type of sales options, I leave these all blank. Ask for ID when creating a new transaction. This is if you're using a counter with one drawer and we have multiple people working out of that drawer. Ask for a commission sales ID when you're invoicing. It'll default to the proper salesperson, but you can override it to a different salesperson. Stay on invoice after sale, I just leave that blank. Ask to print before finalizing the invoices. Combine same SKU items on one transaction. I always check that because if I'm doing quantity breaks and I'm saying that if they buy 3 of any specific item, that third one's going to be free or they're going to get special pricing. So I need to combine them on one invoice for count. Prompt to display a lookup list or add new if it doesn't find the SKU. I usually leave that checked off. Fast add if you want to add inventory right at the register, and use the full calendar scheduler when you're setting up your due dates for your customers' deliveries. And then here's some overrides. Don't ask for the email. Don't ask for the zip code. Don't ask for the phone number. When they are doing a return, how should you handle it? Should you apply the credit immediately or apply the credit later? And you can just say ask what to do. Age verification typically is only when you're doing liquor sales and doesn't apply to us. Touchscreen, this gives you the ability to set up your touchscreen sizes, and some of the counters will use the graphical touchscreen, some don't. Miscellaneous, we're saying we want to show costs when we enter our quotes. That way the salesman knows what our profitability is. Hide the customer info on the scheduling calendar if we don't want to show information about the customer, just that we're going to go ahead and schedule this customer. Skip the prompt for password when taking AR payments in. We typically don't need that, so I skip it. I don't use fast pay at this register. And when I'm retrieving a suspended transaction, I want any workstation in the company to be able to bring up that transaction and finish tendering it. Security is set up for your cameras. So as the cameras are pointing at the storefront counter, you can select an invoice number and the video will come right back to that particular location, and you could watch the sale with sound. Balance register, what kind of reports and stuff do we want when we close out that particular workstation, and where do we want to print them? Credit cards, if we set this up, we use the Vantiv credit card system and NetEPay, and this will let you know that this particular station is doing the credit cards. Devices, Is there going to be a cash drawer hooked up to this workstation? Is there going to be a pole display? Are you using a portable scanner? This is not a barcode scanner. This is a data collector scanner. Are you using multi-monitors? So you can have a customer's monitor and your monitor and be able to display things on the back of those monitors. Setting up COM ports. We have signature capture, the Topaz signature capture. That'll give you the ability for people to go ahead and sign electronically when they're doing pickups. And then here's where you have your printing. What's really important is to delay the printing until the transaction is saved. That way you can use the custom reports that we give you with the really nice fonts that come with it. We can skip the printing of the invoice. We can always prompt to choose which printer we're going to print to. Normally it'll default to whatever printer that is in for these documents. And we can prompt to print a picking list when completing our layaways, orders, etc. And we can print the stock location and what the quantity is on the pick list, so the guy that's back in the warehouse knows where to find it and how many should be back there. We're pretty much not doing tracking of the electronic receipts because we can reprint the receipts from the sales history. We're not going to group our invoice items together or group it by category. And again, on all these forms, these are user-definable forms. We have what we call our report writer, and those are custom forms that are unique to your company with your logo and all the things you want on your forms. So that'll give you the ability to determine which printer that is connected to that workstation is going to print those forms. And that sort of ends the system setup and station manager training. Thank you.